Thank you. So this presentation is, you all heard Kay yesterday, or many of you heard Kay yesterday. So this is on the upstream side of that. She talked about the implementation. And it's very much in the relatively narrow confines of a bank project. And Joel, I think, laid that out very nicely yesterday. I'm going to talk a little bit about a tactic, and I'm going to talk about the process. Lenny suggests that we should spend a little more time on that. And then I'm going to come back to the bank instrument in how we could sort of stretch the boundaries on the bank instrument and how we tried to do that to make it sort of more flexible. But what was the problem? In I think it was about May or June or May, I think, of 2011, the finance minister of Sierra Leone, who's now the foreign minister, Samura, whose picture's up on the poster there, he called the bank and he said, we need help. And the help he wanted was, he said they're under political pressure to increase salaries. They also have a pay reform program, but really it was about increasing salaries. And bank, can you help us with this? Essentially, can you scale up budget support? I think that's more or less what he said. Now, our problem was that we hadn't been working on public sector, public service reform. DFID had been doing that with the European Commission. DFID had pulled out as a result of the bilateral aid review. So there was another set of problems. The government was somewhat embarrassed by the fact that the public sector reform agenda had been sort of dropped by DFID, and they wanted to sort of bring some legitimacy back on that. There was a set of problems there, and then we were constrained by the fact that that's something sort of to do with the bank's own bureaucracy. You have to prepare this project in 8 months. Now, 8 months may seem like a long time for people who are not familiar with the bank's bureaucracy, but it's not such a long time. So this was the set of issues. And the problem we were facing was that if we got into this, we wanted to get into this. We didn't want to, Sierra Leone's an important partner. There was also the risk that in the not so near future, it's not materialized for bad reasons, but that they would have a lot more revenues and they would need partners less and less. This was all the revenues from royalties from iron ore and so forth. And so we needed to remain friends when they were not at a good time. So these were all the various reasons for getting into this, but we didn't want to get caught with holding the wage bill baby, because if we'd gone the way of budget support, then if this wage bill remained a problem, we'd end up with holding it. So there was a set of issues, and we were like, how should we address this? We didn't have a great dialogue. We were working on PFM, but not on civil service issues. Like I said, our negotiating position was at that time seen to be somewhat weak. With Ebola, of course, things have changed considerably, but I don't want to go there. So what did we do? We used a tactic. At that point, the bank's new financing instrument, the P4R, the Program for Results instrument, there was some mention of that yesterday, was not yet available, but it was coming online. So we said, let's use that or something that looks like that. And what are the advantages of this? We can actually provide government with fungible resources predictably. They needed that, and this instrument would allow us to provide that if they delivered on whatever commitments were agreed up front, which is the list of indicators against which the disbursements were made. And we could work out that they could get $5 million periodically if everything went according to plan. And that we could focus attention, and we focused attention on 3 areas of reform in the public service that the government claimed that it was trying to work on. So one was the pay reform, going beyond just increasing pay. The second was performance. And the third was a really obvious one. If you look at the graph there on one of the things, they almost 96 or 95% of the civil service is below the graduate entry level, right? So call it a missing middle or a missing top. There is very little up there, or there was. So just recruiting people to that seemed like an obvious thing to do. So we were not, in the language of the new public management approach, we were not trying to solve a downstream sort of functional problem of what can we do about kids not being in school, but it was sort of a more upstream set of problems, including the fiscal constraints that they were facing. So what we did was, so we got agreement around this, and then we really left it to them to prepare their program. We said, come up with what you think you can reasonably achieve in 4 years, and come up with a set of milestones on the way on each of these 3 reform paths. You find your own milestones that will bring us there, and those will be the reward points. Those will be what we call the disbursement indicators. Now, this was not very easy. They had not been used to working together in a traditional project. Everybody sits there and says, when am I getting the Land Cruisers or the computers or the trips or the sorry. Thanks. Yeah. So that was, and I'll come back to that, I think, because that's sort of critical to the how question. But to answer the questions that were asked, I want to talk a little bit about the politics. How did we handle the politics? I mean, any reform program is political. So we had done some studies in advance of this, but what we felt was that there were 2 kinds of dysfunctions in this system. Some are part of this larger sort of equilibrium, the bad equilibrium that Sierra Leone is in, call it by whatever name. We call them dysfunctions by design. They were part of a grand design. And dysfunctions by default, there were other dysfunctions in the system which had just crept in over the years. We felt you could deal with the latter, not with the former, but we sitting outside didn't have a way. We could make guesses, but what was what. But an approach like this where they found their own paths, and this involves, try to involve as many people in government as is possible, and they look for the paths forward, they would try to avoid at least what they could see immediately as the obvious pitfalls. An added benefit of this, just because the money drops into the Ministry of Finance as fungible resources, but the delivery has to be done by various other agents, it creates the potential for better coordination, and it creates a very nice dynamic which forces the Ministry of Finance to really rely on these people, talk to them and listen to them, who were otherwise, at least in the Sierra Leone context, sort of marginal. And the learning was through really a process of persistence. We were initially told, okay, we've heard enough of this ownership business. Go out, get your consultants, write the project document and move on. And we said, no, we're not doing that. You have to do this. And that began to work. So it was about knocking heads, sort of building confidence, and ultimately the coaching came into it that sort of Kay talked about. So I'll just close with the main lessons. First, I believe that this instrument that we used was much more effective than a traditional sort of budget support DPO for what we were trying to achieve, actually movements along an implementation path. But it is labor intensive and costly, and I think it's an open question whether the bank has the appetite for this. It was not a project. In my view, it was a platform for engagement. We treated it pretty much as a project. And lastly, this point about PDIA with a little I think what this allows is, so if you agree on point A, point B, point C as the path, flexibility on how to go from A to B, it allows for. So there is iteration there, or at least flexibility for the government. But if B doesn't work when you get to B, or C doesn't work when you get to B, then changing that gets harder. We get back to the old business of restructuring and so forth, which can be pretty onerous in the bank's context. But we pretty much reduced the number of contracts that you saw in the picture that Joel drew yesterday, right? There's a series of contracts. Getting from there to there, you make the payments.